This next topic is section 15.8, is on acoustical reverberations. Reverberations are a very important part of sound and music. If we have too much reverberation, it just sounds like everything is echoing. And if we don't have enough, the room sounds dead. How do we make that comparison? Well, it's made based upon what is called, for people who are in acoustics, based upon the reverberation time. It's the time for the sound intensity to reduce by 60 decibels. Okay, this is an important thing to remember, the reverberation time. Remember, if you have a note, you play something, a sound like clapping your hands, that note dies out very rapidly. Never gets to zero, but when it jumps down to being 1/1 millionth of its previous value, that is 60 decibel drop, 1/1 millionth, 60 decibel drop. In other words, it's gone to 1/1 millionth. This value is 1 over 10 to the 6, 1/1 millionth, 10 to the minus 6 of its original value. Then that defines the time it takes for reverberation. Reverberation time, 1/1 millionth. Now, how do we compute this amount of time for the reverberation? Well, it depends upon a number of factors. And you can see that we have to do some calculations here. The reverberation time is given as about 0.049 times the volume of the room divided by the area of absorption for the room. Now, how do we define that? So I want you to imagine that we have a room. And in this room, we have a volume V, and we're going to allow each of the 6 walls in this room to be perfectly reflecting, except at one place, let's say down here at the end, we have a hole in the wall where the sound can come out. This is a perfectly absorbing hole. It's an area, A, where the sound hits this hole, it goes out and it never comes back. And so this hole of perfect absorption, of course you could imagine something like felt or something. It's easier just to have a hole in the wall and the sound goes out and it never comes back, is equivalent to having some absorption at some percentage in other places. So for example, if this hole were as big as half of the cube, then we'd say that's equivalent to having half the cube absorb 50% of the sound. So we're going to begin with this equation right here. The reverberation time is 0.049. You notice we always write a number before the decimal point, times the volume of the room divided by the area, where area is this absorbing hole. And incidentally, these are in cubic feet and square feet. So this is unit dependent. Well, the perfectly absorbing hole is equivalent in area to the absorption coefficient, A, for an area I, for a surface area I, summed up over all of the areas in the room. So you may have one area here that has made out of felt and it has 50% absorption. So it'd be 0.5 times this amount of area. And then maybe something is pretty reflective, so it's 0.9 times that area, or 0.1 times that area. And you add this up with the absorption for each of the areas in the room, summed over I. Well, so now we can take these areas, floor, ceiling, walls, if we know what these absorption coefficients are. What are these absorption coefficients? The values are normally computed at 1 kilohertz. That's 1,000 hertz. Remember I said that was a standard for acoustics. It turns out that marble is 0.01, glass is 0.04, so marble absorbs very little. Glass, very little, but 4 times as much as marble. Plywood on studs is 0.1. So we can say that plywood absorbs 10 times as much as marble for the same area. Well, look at carpet, 0.37, almost 4 times as much as plywood. Plaster is about like plywood, it's 0.1. Acoustical plaster, 0.7, absorbs much more. A person, 7. People are very absorptive. An empty cloth seat in an auditorium is 5. So you can go to the books and find these different absorption coefficients and then add them up for all of the different components of the room. This area, how much area of people, how much of plaster, how much of fabric, how much of just dry plaster. Each time taking the area of everything in the room, of all the walls, multiplying by the coefficient, computing A, that's the effective area of perfect absorption, plugging it in here, computing the volume of the room, multiplying by 0.049. That will give you your time. And there are optimal times for music or for voice and so forth like that that we'll get into in a more advanced discussion of reverberation time.